I've been thinking for about a week of how to introduce you because in many ways, you need no introduction because I think everyone, first of all, my friends, my family, my followers, my listeners, they've all heard about you. They have all heard me talk about you. They have seen me post about you and they've started asking me questions about you.
Oh my gosh.
So on one hand, you need no introduction.
All right.
On the other hand, I don't even know how to possibly introduce you. You are a professor.
Yes.
You are a public speaker. You are an author. You are...
This is what happens when you get old. Okay. The list gets very, very long. I am all those things. I mean, and yet I'm also just a friend and I'm a mom and I'm Pierre's mother. And the other day we were doing actually playing an identity game I was playing with a bunch of friends and I was saying to them, okay, what's the first word that comes to your mouth or your mind when I say I am? So you just have to fill in the blank, I am. And it was really interesting to hear what people had to say. Like, I am a New Yorker, one person said. And another person said, I am an advocate. This was a person who's super involved in social justice. And we ran around the table and then they got to me and said, well, what is it, Suzy? And I said, I guess I would say I am a teacher. I mean, I think that kind of sums up it all. I mean, that's what I'm doing when I'm writing. That's what I'm doing when I'm public speaking. That's what I'm doing in the classroom. And I don't think I started my life as a teacher. I was a big learner and I still am a voracious kind of just absorber of other people and what they have to teach, which is so much. But that's sort of the umbrella.
I love it.
Okay.
I'm stumped now trying to think of what I am.
Yeah, so what is it?
That's hard. That really is the question of like, how do we identify ourselves?
Know.
Who are we to us?
I'm going to add it into my class activities.
Yeah.
Just this one word and you can't fudge it. One word.
That's so hard.
You know when people do it, they do it on their Instagram profiles. So I'm obsessed with Instagram profiles.
Bios.
Like right. The bios. It's like I am, it's so funny to see what order they put them in. There's a lot of performative stuff going on, so it's not really authentic because people are trying to.
Wait, Instagram's not real? What? What do you mean?
I love you, Instagram.
Oh my God.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like you'll have like the most famous person in the world, and it will be like, I am Kathy's father. It's like, no, you're not. You are, you are a famous rock star. But it's and so it gets a little bit gamey, but it's that one word can kind of be very defining.
I am. This is so hard. I struggled to do, so I've been listening to Becoming You for a while now. And I remember being on a road trip, like a 3-hour drive. And I was like, oh my God, this like 6-word memoir. This is crazy. And I probably spent like an hour on the highway trying to write one in my head and I couldn't. Right. Same thing with Whose Life Do You Want Anyway?
Yeah.
Guys, we'll get into all of this soon. Bear with me.
Okay.
And I couldn't do it. And then in the classroom, pen to paper, I was able to do it so quickly where like I came up with like 17 things.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, and everybody processes information and does these exercises differently. I mean, I've seen people not be able to do them at all in the classroom. And then they come back and they've got a long list of things. So we are all wired differently.
I'll report back. I'll report back on it. I'm thinking.
Please do.
I will.
Okay.
I will. Suzy Welch,
hi.
Welcome to Seeing Other People. It is truly an honor and a privilege to have you. I'm so excited for this conversation. Before we get into it, we're going to talk about values. We're going to talk about all my favorite Suzyisms. How did you become you?
Well, it's a long story. I think, and it is the story of everyone's life is how did you become you? I will say that the version of me that you're talking to right now, I became me because of becoming you. So becoming you is a methodology to help you answer the question, what should I do with my life? And I was in a period of my life that we all enter in sometimes or another, and some of us are in for long periods and others are not, where I was completely lost. And this was after the pandemic. The month that the pandemic started, I lost my husband and they were not connected. He had been sick for a long time. But that March 2020, I went up to the woods with everyone else and I went with my kids, but we all ran away from civilization as the pandemic, or we hunkered down in place. And then the pandemic ended and my kids went away and I was like, well, who am I now? And I had this idea to put together a class of this methodology that I had been developing at that point for 15 years or so, this Becoming You methodology that walks you through this process that lands you at figuring out what you want to do with your life. And the first beta tester, 100%, was me because I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And it's almost like out of a movie. Like I didn't intend it that way at all, but I like tested every single tool on me because I was trying to figure it out. And I remember we did an exercise in class where we write little words on cards and then we flip the cards over and our values are on the back of them. And the first time I did it, I was alone in a room and I burst into tears because I was like, this is so right. This is so true. I have to listen to this message. And so I was testing everything. And then I landed in the classroom. So how I became me, well, there were so many versions of me. I grew up in a very artsy fartsy family and one thing led to another. I was luckily very good at sports and I was good at school. I ended up going to Harvard and then I went to Harvard Business School. These were all things that were all versions of me and I lived them out. I then became a mother of 4 children but the version of me you see right now was a version that was able to come to be for all the versions of me that existed before. And then I had a methodology to say, wait, I was 60 then and I didn't want to just keep experimenting. I wanted to just figure it out and make a better guess and go forward in a way that made a lot more sense.
Do you think had you had the tools of becoming you when you were 25, would you have ended up doing something completely different or would you have ended up exactly where you are now?
100% different. I mean, I have to say, I can't tell you the number of times I look back at my life and look, I'm obviously grateful for every last thing that happened to me. I have had a wonderful life. What would I undo? Nothing. I wouldn't undo anything because I then maybe would lose something that was precious to me. Like, okay, I had a first marriage that didn't work, even though we're really close friends now. Would I undo that first marriage that caused me a lot of pain? Of course not, because then I wouldn't have those fabulous children, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but there are many times where I see dumb detours and crazy, well, let's just call them detours, where I would, if I'd had becoming you, I just wouldn't have done it. I would have said, wait, what are my values? What are my aptitudes? What am I really interested in? And I would have said, this is absolutely nonsensical. And I could have saved myself and others a lot. I could probably think of 10 situations like that.
Yeah, it really is fascinating because, becoming you is all about combining your values, your aptitudes, and your economically viable interests to figure out, what your area of transcendence, what you should be doing with your life. But figuring out our values is probably one of the most important things we can do for ourselves. And so many of us go our entire lives without doing it. I mean, I never considered doing it until I took Becoming You. And not only with career, but with relationships, with dating, with figuring out who you want to be and who you want to be with.
Yeah.
It is so important. And it could also probably save us so much heartache.
Well, it could save 1,000 marriages a day. I mean, I think that you're so right what you say about values, in that we talk about values a lot, but I actually have done research on this, and the research is terrifying in showing how few people actually know what their core values are. People don't really even know what values are. I mean, like 7% of the population could define a value. Okay, it's a pretty amorphous term. For the record, values are the deeply held beliefs that galvanize our actions and decisions, but people generally write down virtues, and those are not values. Values are these deeply held beliefs that guide how we act and how we make decisions. And if we really just can't come to them without doing some hard work and some exercises that get us there. And so, I mean, the beauty of the Values Bridge, this tool that I have invented out of complete frustration, saying it can't just happen in the NYU classroom. As much as I love my NYU classroom, people have to have access to this incredibly important data about themselves. I mean, it's incredibly important work that drives I mean, I think I accidentally invented a dating app, as I've said to you, because when marriages bust up, or relationships, you don't have to be married, when they bust up, at the end of the day, if you peel it back, it's about a mismatch in values, 99% of the time. And there actually are there's 15 core values according to my body of work. And I would say there are certain values that I call the divorce values, because if they're mismatched, you're going to get a divorce eventually. And I've seen these same values actually save relationships. Like one of the values, just as an example, there's a value that I give a Greek name to because I don't want to be judgy. This is like a huge important thing to me, is that your values are your values. I'm agnostic. If they're hurting no one, then you have a right to any set of values you want. I may not agree with them. They may not be my values. They're yours. Congratulations. Okay. But one of the values in my lexicon is this one that I call eudaimonia. It's the Greek word for pleasure, but it really covers well-being, recreation, leisure. It's like anything that makes you feel good. And some people, their whole lives are organized to increase their eudaimonia. And you know them. Okay. They usually present as people who have a heck of a lot more fun than you do. And other people, like I'm a person who's kind of low on this. Like I really believe in hard work and I really believe in achievement. I'm kind of a bore in this way. Like I never wake up in the morning thinking, what can I do that will be super fun? And yet I know those people exist. I'm kind of in awe of them, but they're not me. And I have seen many relationships ultimately fall apart because one person, and it's usually the man, really values eudaimonia, his own fun, pleasure, recreation, well-being. I mean, everything in there, like sex is in there, okay? But so is your health, okay? And so is water skiing. I mean, anything that kind of makes you feel good and is about you is eudaimonia. And there are some relationships where the man is maximizing for it and the woman is not because she's got other values, okay? But I've seen it save marriages. I know a couple, and it was sad. There was an infidelity. It almost wrecked them. Everybody thought they were over, but they had the exact same level of eudaimonia and they went and had a lot of fun together all the time and it saved them. So values are making or breaking in the area that you talk a lot about, which is of course relationships. And it's not just it's just not at home, it's also at work.
When it comes to figuring out our values before getting into relationships, or not even before, but just separately from your partner, how can we start to do that? That way we can figure out how to grow our values with our partner together. Because it starts independently.
Yes, you have your own values. And actually, one of the unhealthy things that happens in relationships is we start living by our partner's values and we sublimate our own or we suppress our own. That's deadly. Okay, it really is because it can't be sustained. But my goodness, I mean, when I was working at the Oprah magazine, I wrote columns about this stuff a lot. And Oprah, in her genius, took all of her columnists and she put us in a bus and she put us on the road and we would go from city to city and all of the columnists would give speeches and I would talk about values. And afterwards, there'd always be a long line of women waiting to speak to me. And I would say 50% of the time, I would be presented with an incredibly distressed looking woman of any age saying, I think I might be living by my husband's values. And that you lose yourself. You completely lose yourself. So the hard work and the first work is to figure out your own values. Now, this also happens to moms in that they sublimate all their values for their children, and that's fine. And it's actually, I did it. It's kind of necessary. There's a period where you can't be sitting there saying like, my values come first and still be the mother you want to be for most people. Okay. Certainly mothers do it and there's all different ways to be a mother. So no judgment, but most of the time in the period where the kids are young, their needs and wants come before your values. Okay. But this work of figuring out our own personal values it starts inside of us. And here's the bad news. I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is it can be done. I mean, that's what Becoming You is all about. The bad news is it's really hard to do randomly. Like you can't just sit down at a table and say, what are my values? And in fact, I have a very firm practice in my class, which I never, ever start the semester by asking people their values because I know they're not going to have an accurate list. Then it biases them towards finding out what the real information is. And most people will just be really flummoxed by it and then get kind of defensive. Like, wait, I know my values. But the facts are, you don't really know your values. And I can only say that because I have thousands of pieces of empirical data that suggest that people don't know what their values are. Now, values are so amorphous and the term is just so woo-woo. That's the reason that I actually came up with the 15 core values. And basically these are it's like a DNA profile. Everybody's got these 15 core values. I think I've captured them all. I mean, the testing would suggest I have. And everybody exists on a continuum. Okay, so let's just take that value I just spoke about, eudaimonia. Okay, that's the desire for pleasure, fun, and well-being as a life organizing principle. Some people have it at a level 7, that's the top in our rating, and some people have it at a 1. And eventually, if you look at all 15 values and you rate yourself on all of them, you'll have a values profile. I think that that's a better way of doing it. And believe me, it took me quite a bit of time and study to get to that point. That's a better way of doing it than randomly saying to people, what are your values? Because then you end up getting people saying things like, I've literally had this. My value is pragmatism, or my value is efficiency. And like, okay, well, those are really good personality traits, but they're not actually values. So I finally developed this language around values so that we could all start talking to each other about values in a shared language.
Yeah. I can imagine people hearing this, learning more about you, learning more about the Values Bridge when it comes out, reading your book, going on dates and having these conversations.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the funniest things that ever happened with the Values Bridge, which is this tool that basically has you answer questions and then tells you which of the values you have as your top values, your moderate values, and your peripheral values, is that I had a group of, this is what it is to be an academic. I had a group of my colleagues over, all of them professors at NYU, and all of them actually, except for one, were in my department, which is management and organizations, which is where we study organizational psychology. And one of the professors told me that, and this is a fun fact, in the country of Iceland, so many people are related to each other because there's really sort of 9 founding families of Iceland, that the government downloaded the entire DNA profile of everybody ever born in the country onto a online website. And they created a functionality where when you're out, and everybody downloads it into their phone. When you're out at a bar and you're about to go home with somebody, you can bump your phone with them
to see if you're related.
See if you're related. Okay. And she said,
Unreal.
the ultimate use of your tool, Suzy, is that you download your values into your phone and you're at a bar and you bump your phone and you see if you've got a values match. Okay. And I think it's complete genius. She thinks the whole thing should be called the values bump. And actually, I would love this sort of shortcut when you're sort of trying to hire somebody, or you've just met somebody, or if you're wondering like what's going wrong in a meeting, like why can't we find common ground, like let's bump our phone, and you could immediately see where you've got the values disconnect. For instance, some people, one of the values that's very plainly named is achievement. Okay. And achievement is this desire for seen success, for what some people would consider conventional success. People who are high on achievement really care about winning. All right. There was an interview with Tom Brady the other day, and they asked him, like, wasn't there a lot of stress in the Patriots locker room? And he said, for me, stress was not winning a Super Bowl ring. And I was like, the only thing I could think was like, that guy's off the charts on achievement. Okay. That is like this strong desire for seen success. And sometimes when people don't get along, it's because one person has just got this defining value of achievement, and the other thinks winning and losing are stupid constructs and they hate them. And they'll be talking about a lot of other things, and then it starts getting really personal and they start criticizing each other. You're this, you're that. But in fact, they just really disagree about how much achievement is a value. Like, my closest friend in the world is my sister Della, and she's a yoga teacher occasionally, and she's got this beautiful life with her wonderful partner, and it in no way resembles my life. And she thinks that my obsession and interest in winning and achievement and having products and starting a business are just completely mystifying. And she's literally said to me things like, why does there have to be winning? And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, are we from the same womb? We are. Okay. But I love her. And the way I frame it up is, we just have really different values around achievement. I love everything about her, but this is when we don't agree, it's because of this.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there will be dates, or in my fantasy world, because I have such a high value of achievement, that you would like bump your phone and you will say, oh my God, this has been a really awkward date for the first hour, but let's keep talking because we're like a 90% values match.
And it's possible that maybe one person was just talking about one thing that the other person didn't care about for the first hour.
Right.
And I think we leave so many dates feeling like it wasn't a match, or things were awkward or felt misaligned, when we got to know 0.0001% of a part of somebody.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to it. And then we take it personally of like, oh, well, they didn't want a second date with me. And it's like, well, you hardly scratched the surface. And maybe the surface that you were about to scratch was the wrong surface for you to be scratching.
Interesting.
Because there are things about my husband and I that like we're so different on. Like, we don't really, like, I don't care about the Jets, and he's their biggest fan.
Yeah.
And if he had sat down on the first date and just talked to me about football, I would have been like, I'm never seeing this guy again.
Yeah.
But that's one part of him.
What did he talk to you about on the first date?
We talked about our shared love for the Jonas Brothers.
Okay.
We talked about, I don't even know. It was 20 degrees. It was during COVID, outdoor dining.
I have to tell you,
how cold we were.
I have to tell you a Jonas Brothers story.
Oh my God.
Okay. So I went to the US Open with the fancy people at JP Morgan who happen to be my bankers. Okay. And everybody gets assigned seating. So I'm sitting next to this guy who's super friendly, and people keep on coming up and asking to get a picture with him. And so it appears quite quickly to me that he might be famous. And so I surreptitiously take a photograph of him, like from under my leg, like when he was talking to somebody, and I sent it to my daughter, and I said, I think I'm sitting next to somebody famous. And I sent it to her, and she wrote back, okay, well, she used some words that were not like, you don't want to say in public, but she's like said, "Oh my effing God, Mom, that's Joe Jonas." And I was like, okay. So I will say this, that he realized, to his great credit, he realized early on in the conversation that he was sitting next to the one person in the face of the universe who did not know who Joe Jonas was. And he actually said to me at one point, "Hey, I'm Joe, and you are?" And I said, "I'm Suzy." And we talked, and he was he was delightful. We had a fabulous conversation. And he still thinks, God, I met that one person who didn't know who I was. But he is, so there you go.
I'm sure he loved it.
He seemed to have a very nice time.
Yeah.
I know. Whatever.
Yeah, they're really they're very down to earth guys.
It's like I somehow just missed it because I love music,
so
and
funny.
I'm generally really like with it generally for a person my age. But I didn't. I missed that. I missed the Joe Jonas moment.
Well,
Sorry.
now you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Now
So
you know.
so that's good that you had that one shared thing.
Yeah, and we grew up very similarly. Like we grew up also like 15 minutes apart.
Yeah.
We knew we had shared friends in common. There was a lot that we had in common, a lot we could have talked about that we did talk about, but there were also things that had we talked about that, we probably wouldn't have been interested in each other.
Yeah, but there was enough of a spark. There was enough chemistry, right?
It was fine.
Okay.
I always say it was a very fine date. And prior to that, every date that I was excited about, I would go home and say to my roommates, like, I'm in love.
This is the guy.
This is the guy.
Right.
And those all crashed and burned.
Right. Now, when you went home on the date with him, what did you think? Like if somebody said to you, that is the guy you're going to marry, what would have you said?
Interesting.
You would have said interesting?
Yeah. I think I always say like, I went home. I wasn't like, I'm dying to see this guy again. Like, I'm going to die if I don't. Like,
right.
He was on a second date. I went home being like, oh, yeah, that was fine. He was nice. He was cute.
And then who asked who out next?
He said, I had a great time and would love to see you again.
Okay. And then,
I said, okay.
And then how soon afterwards did you see each other?
A week later.
Okay.
And then after that, there was a 2-week gap because I was traveling. I went to visit family in Florida.
Okay.
I came back a week early because I got a phone call on Friday night that I got off of a wait list to get a vaccine.
Oh, well, God, those are the days.
And
yeah,
they were like,
right.
Can you be here tomorrow at like 2 p.m.? And I'm not telling them I'm in Florida. I'm like, yep, I'll be there. So I flew back and we were like texting a bit and I told him, and he works in the restaurant industry and he was working on weekends at the time. And he was like, I'm supposed to work tomorrow, but I'd love to find someone to cover my shift so I can like take you to brunch.
Oh.
And I was like, whoa.
Well, he was hot shot. He was ready to go.
Yes. And that date was actually, I think, like from that point, that's when I was like, I see a future with this guy.
Yeah. And what was it?
I felt like absolute hell that day.
Yeah.
I felt sick. Like,
yeah.
I felt like I had
vaccine,
COVID.
Right.
I got ready. I made a fake sling to put my arm in because I couldn't move it. He had to cut my food for me and like put my jacket on for me. And we had an amazing day. We had so much fun. Like we continued the date after brunch. We went to a bar that we like both went to in our early 20s.
It's very romantical.
And then it is. After that, I was like, listen, like I'm gonna go home and sit on my couch and watch One Tree Hill.
Yeah.
Do you know One Tree Hill?
Yes, I do. I know. I'm actually much more with it than that story led on. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
For until I fall asleep. Like you're welcome to come watch One Tree Hill with me.
And he
said okay, and he came over. I changed into sweatpants. I put my hair up. I probably took my makeup off. We just laid on the couch, watched One Tree Hill, and I was like, wow, this is a guy that on a day where I feel like absolute shit, I can go have a really fun time with, and then come home and just chill with.
I love. That's great, and that's very promising.
Yeah.
And I bet you if you both did the values bridge, you would be a 90% match.
I think we are. And I've talked to him about it like since the course. That first night I went home, like all I wanted to do was talk to him about it. Like I want you to take all of these tests. Like we need to know everything.
Right.
But that leads me to ask, what about when values are mismatched? When you're already like deep into a relationship or in a marriage?
Yeah.
Can it still work?
Yes.
Because our values change over time.
They do. But there's certain core values that pretty much hold, okay? Like achievement, that doesn't really change. I mean, you can see achievement presenting in a kid very young, okay? But we do have values that change. Kids change them, relationships change them. My husband got sick, some of my values really changed. But then they changed back. I mean, as my life after he died and I came back into my own self again, some of those values came back. But I was changed. I was a changed person. But there's no reason why people with different values can't have healthy, thriving, robust relationship. Look, I have this great relationship with my sister, say, and we have different values. And I definitely have, I've only had 2 real romantic partners in my life because I was just married twice and I was not a big dating girl. But I'd say that you can you can work around it. And the way you can do it is by talking about the values instead of the other person. Mm-hmm. It's like, look, this is just a case where our very different views of scope are coming to play. So scope is this value that we talked about in class, which is about how big a life you want. Okay. Some people want these big, exciting, stimulating lives. I always like throw up this picture of Bianca Jagger entering Studio 54 on a white stallion. Like she had the scope life. Like Diane von Furstenberg has this incredible, like if you follow her Instagram as I do, like she's always in a different city with some other fabulous person with this hugely scoped life. And other people want, as I say that the meme from TikTok, I like this little life, right? Yeah. It's like they have a very twee, like my son and his wife have the most beautiful, like, they're the king and queen of twee hipsterism in Brooklyn, and they have a beautiful, scoped, predictable, serene lives. I mean, you walk into their home and you just, and my life, which is an extremely high scope life, is just too chaotic for them. They can, it's just get away with that life. So say two people with different versions of scope as values are together in a relationship. Can it survive? Yes, as soon as they have the language to say, okay, I'm low scope, you're high scope. How will we accommodate that? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to go do a high scope thing for a weekend. It's not about you. It's about my value that I really like high scope. And I'm going to go take care of that value while you go do your low scope thing with your sister, your friends or whatever. And we'll get back together again and we'll meet in the middle. Yeah. But you've got to have the language to talk about it. It's not personal. It's about, we come to our values very honestly by experience. I mean, they just build up in us, and if we can acknowledge the other person's values and not be judgy, that's mm-hmm. the hard part. If we can not be judgy, we can learn to live with other people's values.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is so much to be said about just figuring out that is your value and then being able to articulate it. Yeah. Like, I love the example that you've given about how you explain to your kids that, like, you're going to continue working. Yep. Working is one of your values and it will make you a better mom.
Right. So the value is work centrism. Thank you for mentioning it. And that is the centrality of work as an organizing principle. So it's not like I value work per se. I value the concept of work as the organizing principle of my life. I love work. When I was 5 years old, I wanted a briefcase. And this is important to understand because my father was a funky psychedelic architect in the 60s and my mom was a ceramicist. Okay, she threw pots. And you got a kid, they gave birth to a child who wanted a briefcase. And in fact, they just didn't even acknowledge it. They were like, oh, little Suzy. Like and they didn't pay. Look, this was the 60s. It was like see you at dinner kind of, culture in those days with kids. But I work was always really interesting to me. And I remember one time my dad had over a group of architects who were visiting from Scandinavia. And there was a woman among them who was a working architect. She was probably 30 or 40. And I gravitated towards her and I wanted to hear every word out of her mouth. And I was fixated on this woman who was a professional woman. I wanted to know everything about her. And so work centrism was kind of in me, and I was going to keep on seeking work that fulfilled that value, that was, gave me meaning and momentum and all these other things. Now, then of course I had children, and my work centrism was not their value. And of course work was no value to them, and they didn't like my value at all. And it was screwing up their lives a lot. They kept on saying, like, why can't you be like other moms? Like, why is it on St. Patrick's Day, we're the only kids not dressed in green because you just didn't read the memo? And I didn't, I was in this way, I was just really focused on work. And finally I had to sit them down, as I had been trying to sort of have work centrism as my value because it was in me, but not tell anybody. I just try to be the best mother I could muster being with this not as my value. And so I had 4 kids, and I remember there was this moment of truth where I sat them down and I said, look, I really love work. And the way I look at it is I'm happy when I'm working, and you want a happy mother. And the way I see it is that one day you're going to grow up and go away, but I'm still going to be here. And I don't want to be that person. When I look at that and I think about myself with not having any career in 20 years and having to start from scratch, then that's a very hard road. And I need your help here. I need your help because I'll meet your needs and I'll be the best mom I can be, but I need you to respect who I am as well. And thank God they helped me. Thank God they did. Me being able to articulate to them that it was a value. And I said to them, I remember at the time, you may or may not have this value when you grow up yourself. This is not in everybody. And lo and behold, with the 4 children, 2 of them have it and 2 of them really do not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting to think about, the way we grow up, how that shapes our values,
yes,
but also how the things that happen to us shape our values. And I think to your point with motherhood, like, and you saying like one day you guys are going to grow up and be gone, so like I have to maintain my values, that fully coincides with why you should not take over your partner's values.
Yes.
Because you guys might break up. You might get divorced.
Right. But sometimes women do it, or men do it, because they think they'll lose them otherwise.
Totally.
And
I was the CEO of doing that prior to meeting Jake.
Right.
I threw my whole life and my independence out the window. I wanted to like please the person by being involved in their life and their interests, and I completely ditched mine.
That's right.
And that left me heartbroken and depressed when it didn't work out. And no wonder it didn't work out, because I lost myself.
You were a hostage. I mean, you were just a hostage or prisoner of war, you might say. I mean, where you give over all your values to somebody, and then they're going to break up with you anyway because they weren't your authentic values. Yeah. So it's a terrible situation to be. But so common, so human, so typical, so typical.
Yeah. Okay. There are a few things I want to talk about that really stuck out to me in becoming you. Yeah. But before we do that, my mind was blown when I heard you talk about your 10-10-10 method.
Oh, okay.
And just with decision making, I mean, I'm the most indecisive person that I know. And so when I first heard you talk about it, I actually think it's changed my life in the last few months.
I'm so glad to hear about it.
But we need to talk about it.
Okay, all right. So 10-10-10 has stood the test of time, okay? I think I first wrote about it for Oprah about 16, 17 years ago. And it's so funny how it came up. I was using this methodology to make decisions because I was a desperate woman. I mean, I was making first of all, I wasn't making decisions. All the decisions were making themselves, and my life showed for it. It was just a disaster. I was just totally reactive. I was, oh my God. You know, when you don't make decisions, things fall apart, okay? And I was a perfect case in point. So I started using this decision-making method, which I invented on the fly out of desperation, which I named 10-10-10, which I'll explain in a second. And life was going on, and I was using it, and it completely changed my life. Like in the course of like 2 weeks, it changed my life. I mean, I went from like completely discombobulated, just a mess, everything falling apart, to people thinking like, have you been invaded by aliens? Suddenly you're very thoughtful and everything, like I totally, like my temperature sort of, went from like 500 to like, 90. And it was just incredible, like change. And I was on the phone pitching my monthly ideas to Oprah magazine. And offhandedly, I said to Gayle King, one day I should write about this little methodology I use. And I described it to her, and she literally said, stop everything and write about it today. And so that was like 16, 17 years ago. And I mean, I have been one of the greatest joys and wonders of my life is the number of people for whom this has been a transformative little technology. It goes like this. When you are faced with a decision, as we are over and over again every day, and there's 2 or 3 or 4 options, take those options. Now, sometimes you have to do this with a piece of paper and a pencil. You can sometimes do it in your head, but you know what? It's better to write it down. Okay, write down the 3 or 4 options you've got. And then for each one, you're going to make like a little chart for each one. Think about the consequences in 10 minutes. That's the immediate future. In 10 months, the foreseeable future. And 10 years, the future you want to create. Now, is 10 minutes exact? No, it could be 8 minutes. It could be 1 day. We're talking about the immediate future. 10 months, same thing. The future you can foresee. That's 6 months. That's 2 years. And then, but 10 years, that's pretty, that's the future you want to create. Then you've got sort of a bunch of data on a piece of paper. You've got the 3 options, and you've sort of dumped this data in a very systematic way onto a piece of paper saying, okay, here are all the options. Here are all the consequences, immediate, near term, and long term. And then you look at them, and there's a very important sort of moment where you have to say, but what are my values? Okay, this is where the values, and this is when I really started doing values work, is to do 10-10-10 properly, you kind of have to know your values. So you've got this screen of your values, okay? My values are eudaimonia, achievement, and money, okay, which we call enoughism, to not be judgy about it. How much money you want, is it called enoughism? And then you look at all the data and you think, oh, given those values, it's so obvious this is the best option. It just pops at you. It's like, it's almost immediate how it pops up into your face. And a lot of times you think, oh, I've been making all my decisions based on the 10-minute consequence because I've just not forced myself to look out, and I've not required myself to bring in the consideration of values as I've been making decisions. I've sublimated them. I've suppressed them because I've been scared of that 10-minute consequence, or I have not been fully honest with myself about the life I want to create, or I've thought it's too impossible to create it. And so that's the tool. And I can't tell you, I mean, I've used it in tiny little decisions. Do I go to a party or not? And because I'm just like, I can't decide. And then I sit there and I do the process. It takes all of 2 minutes, 1 minute. And I'm like, oh, it's so obvious. I absolutely must go to this party or not. Yeah. And I've used it for huge decisions, and it has been absolutely. And what it does is it allows you to talk to people about your decisions in a really thoughtful, like, you don't say, oh, I made it based on gut. You say, let me tell you how I made that decision. I thought about my values. They're A, B, and C. Then I thought about the consequences. I laid them out like this, and ultimately my decision was this. And people are like, you're smart. I mean, it's just a crazy thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of the times I've used it, I've realized, like, the reason I've held off on deciding like yes is because of that 10 minutes I might feel a little uncomfortable, or in 10 minutes between now and 10 minutes from now I'm gonna have to do something that I really don't want to do.
Absolutely.
But in 10 months I won't even think about that anymore. I don't care.
That's right.
And I'm going to a conference in Miami in a week and a half, and I don't know anybody going to it.
Yep.
I'm traveling so much lately. I know that's like so exhausting for me. I'm a creature of habit. I love routine. But I was like, I literally did 10, 10, 10. Right. I'm like, in 10 months, I'm going to look back and be glad I did that. Yes. I'm probably going to have learned something, made a great connection. Sure, like in 10 days when I go, I might be tired. Right. But in 10 years, who knows what that experience will or will not have led me to.
That's right. And, sometimes you can't fill out every box of the data. Yeah. And sometimes you would make your decision this way anyway. Like sometimes we sort of naturally, organically 10, 10, 10 things, but sometimes we just don't. And we don't make the best decisions. The thing about the tool is that it just forces us to make decisions wisely and systematically in a way. And it also, the best thing about it is it allows us to explain our decisions to the people they impact. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you're about to impact somebody in that 10 minutes and it's really awkward and horrible, but you can say, let me talk you through why I made this decision. And a lot of times people say, look, I use this tool 10, 10, 10, and it does it. And it sort of takes the mystery out of why you made a decision that may have impacts that you don't like in the short term.
Yeah, and maybe it's deciding if you want to go on a second date with somebody, or you're a few dates in and you know that you really want kids and they've expressed that they don't, but you really like them.
Right.
Okay, well, cutting it off in 10 minutes is going to suck.
Right.
In 10 months, you might not be over it, but you probably will. And in 10 years, you'll probably be with the person who wants kids.
Right.
And let's say you didn't cut it off.
Right.
In 10 minutes, okay, great. You get to see the person. You get to be happy. In 10 months, you're still living in this imaginary world where this can work out. In 10 years, you're miserable because one of you had to sacrifice what you valued and what you wanted.
Right. Or you're in, exactly. I mean, that, and so many relationships end up in that 10-year spot where it's, I mean, I saw this. I had a friend who really wanted the man she was with to marry her. And he said to her from the first day, look, if marriage is what you're after, I'm not going to do it. My kids don't want me to remarry. I'm never marrying again. And she kept on waiting him out, thinking he was going to change his mind. And he didn't. And then 8 years into the relationship, he was still saying, look, there's never going to be marriage. And she said, now I've invested all this time in the relationship. And she should have just 10, 10, 10 and gone out early on. And she would have been with somebody who, marriage was a huge value to her. She really wanted to get married.
Yeah. Similar but different. You talked about the velvet coffin, which I know in many use cases are career. Mm-hmm. But I would love for you to explain what that is to people. And I think it really pertains to feeling complacent in a relationship.
Yes.
And exactly what your friend went through, you've already invested so much time in it.
Right.
So why are you going to leave?
It gets harder and harder to get out. Right. So the velvet coffin is a terrible image, but it's so accurate. And that is when we're sort of in a very cushy sort of accommodation with ourselves, but we're not living, or we're slowly dying. And the longer we lay there, the lid just closes slowly on us and it gets heavier and heavier and harder to get out of it. And it happens a lot in a career where you just sort of say, oh, but one thing kind of keeps you in it. The commute's very good. Mm-hmm. Okay. The work has no meaning to me. The money is not that great, but God, I'd have to commute into the next closest city. And really, is the commute the most important thing? And as you're trying to decide that, the coffin slowly closes on you to the point where you're just sort of unemployable anywhere else. And you're stuck there. And you think, really, for the commute? But it happens in relationships all the time where we keep on letting things that are not our values get a pass. Okay. He drinks too much, or she never follows through on commitments or whatever it is. And these are not values of ours, but there's something like you've already moved in together. And moving out is going to be super awkward. And you let the velvet coffin lid close on both of you. And usually both of you are not happy. And then that's why you see so many long-term marriages that are just unbelievably miserable. And I mean, I have friends who I joke separately with them that they're the longest running unhappy marriage in humankind. And I say, like, why did you stay married? They both say for spite. And I say, there's a good reason. And they both say we should have gone out when we were 20. Wow. And they let the velvet coffin close.
Wow. I have had a handful of people reach out to me and say, like, hey, I was engaged. I called off my engagement. I'd love to come and talk about it. And every time I'm like, absolutely yes.
Yes.
Because that takes so much strength.
Courage.
I mean, you've sent the save the dates out. Everybody knows.
Yes, I know.
It is shaking up your world.
Yeah.
But it is, if that's what feels right, that is the absolute best thing in the
do
world
it now.
to do.
Do it now. I mean, I went to a wedding one time. It was in the most beautiful spot. Everybody was literally sitting there down, and the bride and groom didn't come down the aisle. And like there was whispering, like, what's going on? And then finally the maid of honor came out and she said, they have decided not to go through with it. And everybody let up a huge cheer because everybody there kind of understood better to do that than carry on the wedding. And we had a huge party and it was fun. And they came out and danced and everybody, and I still remember like what courage it took for them to say last minute, look at each other and say, no, even though everyone was there, they did it. Yeah. It was quite the, and then actually another couple got up and took advantage of everybody being there. And they didn't have any of the paperwork done or anything like that, but they got married by the pastors there. And then they went and got really married and they're still together.
Wow.
That couple that did it. It was hysterical.
I have done so many would you rathers with friends of like, let's say that happened, or like, let's say you found out horrible news right before the wedding, or like you found out the person was cheating on you. Like, would you go through with the wedding ceremony for show, like for the sake of it, and then call it off after? Yeah. Like, it's so crazy.
I have I know of a situation where the bride, the day before the wedding, told the groom that she actually wasn't sure not about him, but about her gender orientation, and gave him the choice the day before the wedding. And he went through with it. And but I wonder about doing that the day before. I mean, everybody was there, and I think it's a really hard thing to put yourself in. I don't know what either of them would have done in the moment, but it's a pretty big piece of news to dump on somebody.
Yeah, I imagine that person was just trying to push it down and not think about it, not bring
or
it up,
maybe
and then it just like they couldn't do it without.
Right, I have to say it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's a biggie.
Oh my God, that is so crazy. One other tool that I thought was very interesting that I struggled with in my quote unquote road trip was, whose life do you want anyway?
Yeah.
I think that, first of all, even in class, I struggled with that. But I like the fact that we can look at other people in our life, whether we know them, they're mentors, we look up to them, and we can pinpoint things that we appreciate and admire and things that we also wouldn't want.
Right.
So I think that was the missing piece for me when I was trying to do this on whatever highway in New Jersey. I was like, there's nobody. I could not think of a single person whose entire life.
That's right. But that's why you have the safety valve in that tool. Okay. Yes. So the tool works in that, sometimes it's very hard just to assess what our values are. And so one of the tools that I use in class comes at it sideways by asking you, whose life do you want? If you had to trade lives, I'm the queen of the world. I say you have to change lives of somebody. Whose life would you take? And I allow people to leave out some things, but you have to identify what you would leave out. And this is all data to help us identify values. Because once you put down 4 or 5, 6 people, you start to see patterns. Like, why is it that everybody I chose is famous? Why is it that everybody I chose is single? Right? I mean, we start to see some stuff like, wait, I'm attracted to famous single people who, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it tells you what it's a very interesting leading indicator on values. But then also, so are what we leave out. So for instance, on my list, I have 3 women who are very, very well known. But one woman is on my list of whose life I would want. And she went to law school and then never worked another day. And in her life, she built a beautiful, beautiful family. And the reason why she's on my list is that I love how her family operates. I love all the joy in her family. I love how she's very family centered. They have these family tennis matches, which are just hysterical. And you just you wish you're part of that family. I always say, I wish you had more children so I could go to more of your children's weddings. But in my list of things that I'd leave out was the fact that she never worked. And I was like, that's as much of a piece of data as the good stuff about her. And so, I mean, there's nobody whose life I would switch with entirely either. I get it. The point of the exercise is it takes into account that there's not somebody you would, but it's very interesting to me when it tells me something when there's somebody who literally can't put anybody down. Because to me, what that doesn't suggest you have the perfect life. It suggests that you're very defended about your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you don't want to admit something. And I've only seen it happen a few times, and I've done it, I mean, certainly 1,000 times at this point.
Yeah. What came to mind when I was thinking about it over the past week especially was how similar it is to this concept of relationship role models and how important it is, when you're single or when you're building a relationship with somebody to figure out like what relationships do you look up to?
Yes.
Because not everybody has parents whose relationship they admire. So true. And that's realistic and that's okay. But there have to be other people that you can pinpoint where you can say, here's something about the relationship that I value, or there's something about that relationship that I would never want in
That's
mine.
such a great point. I mean, one of the most beautiful moments of my entire life was during the first dance with my son at his wedding. He danced first with his wife, and then she danced with her dad, and he danced with me. And we were, I'm going to cry when I tell this story, but we were dancing, and my son said to me, I want you to know that if we have half the relationship, half the marriage you have with Jack, we'll be overjoyed. You're the paradigm. You're what we look up to. Your marriage is the greatest role model. And I mean, it was just unbelievably, I thought, okay, so I was not always there, but I built in my marriage this role model for my kids. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It was a great marriage, and they learned what a great marriage looked like by how we treated each other and the fun we had.
That is beautiful. And that is a beautiful note to start to close this out on, even though I really, really don't want to. But we end every episode by asking, what is the best piece of dating or relationship advice you've ever received or have to give?
Okay. I don't have a lot of dating advice because I've not dated a lot in my life, like basically, I mean, zero dating advice. But I have relationship advice because I had a super happy marriage with Jack, and it was sadly much shorter than we would have wanted because he got sick. But the one thing that he and I did, we wanted to get our marriage right. For both of us, it was not our first marriage. And for me, it was my second marriage. For him, it was his third marriage. And we really weren't going to screw up again. And we really, really wanted to have a happy marriage. And so I had read research that had done a very robust longitudinal study of what made happy marriages. And they said that the one defining aspect of these marriages was that the husband and the wife conceived of this thing called the marriage, and that there was like a third entity in their marriage. There was the other person, there was themselves, and then there was this thing called the marriage. And the thing that they put first was not the other person, which is the typical advice. Put your partner first, meet your partner 60% of the way, blah, blah, blah. But actually what they put first was this thing that they revered called the marriage. And so Jack and I made this open commitment to each other that we were going to have this thing called the marriage that we were going to talk about like it was a thing or a person or a company or
you guys are co-founders of the marriage.
Right, that's right. And so we would often have a decision, and we would say, well, what are the implications for the marriage? And we never talked about what are the implications for me, what are the implications for you, we just talked about the marriage like it was an institution, and it worked incredibly well for us. Like we would just say like, well, what are we doing for the marriage this week? And we treated the marriage like there was nothing but the marriage. I mean, it was the most important thing in the house. And we would even talk to the kids about the marriage. And it became this thing like the marriage. And it worked incredibly well. I mean, and I think it was the source of, because the marriage was a living thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have to nurture it.
And we nurtured it, pay attention to it. It was the priority, the marriage. So we did that. That was great. And then, I give that piece of advice. If you don't have that, you can kind of retrofit it out and say, well, what is the marriage and what do we do for it?
How would you balance the marriage versus the kids?
Well, the marriage came first because we really believe that the greatest gift you can give children is a happy marriage. We totally agreed on that point. I mean, that some people believe it, some people don't. But I grew up in a house where my parents, who are still married at 95 and 98, still married, still kicking, they didn't, in our early years, they had a lot of strife and they did not have the happiest marriage. They would tell you now they have the happiest marriage in the world, but they're 95 and 98, so it took some time. But anyway, and I remember the pain it caused me as a kid to see my parents not getting along. And I really wanted my kids to see happy parents. And I think actually a happy mother, I mean, all research would show that a happy mother is a gigantic driver of the emotional health of adolescent girls. And so I wanted to I wanted to give the kids this, not selfishly happy, but happy. And so we would often say, like, okay, what does this do for the marriage? What does this do for the kids? And if we had to choose between the two, we would choose the marriage, knowing that the downstream implications were good for the kids as well.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's like A squared plus B squared equals happy kids.
Yeah. I mean, it worked for us. It's
Yeah.
not going to work for anybody, but Jack and I were like very, very aligned. Unlike we were super similar. Like our personalities were exactly the same and so forth. And it was weird because getting both of us was a lot in the room. Okay. But we agreed strongly on this. Yeah. And that in and of itself created quite a lot of harmony.
I love that. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. Where can everybody find you? Where can they stay tuned for the Values Bridge and the book and all that good stuff that they want and need?
Well, please, that would be lovely if people stayed in touch with me. And I'm so grateful to you for being on this fantastic podcast. My website is SuzyWelch.com, and I got Instagram at Suzy Welch, and I'm on TikTok and LinkedIn and all the usual places you would expect to find me. And I have a podcast, and you can find it on Apple or Spotify or any place you listen to podcasts. And that is a lot of where I talk about these exercises and I go through them. And as soon as Values Bridge is available, we'll get it out to people. And the best way to find out when it's coming is to take a listen to the podcast.
It's so good. Listen to it. It's called Becoming You. Go find it right now. Suzy, thank you.
My great pleasure.
Bye, guys.